In today's video, I'm going to be talking about the relationship between virtue signaling and spiritual abuse. Virtue signaling occurs when somebody appears to support a particular virtue, but they don't really do any actions that would show their alignment with that virtue. So let me give you an example. An example of virtue signaling can occur when somebody expresses that it's really important to take care of the environment, but then behind closed doors, they're very wasteful and they don't recycle and they don't engage in environmentally conscious behaviors. And so when you think about virtue signaling, it can happen a lot, especially within spiritually abusive environments. And um, I'm going to do a series of videos that will explore, different types of spiritual abuse. And one of the types of spiritual abuse, or rather, one of the vehicles that we will see for spiritual abuse, involves virtue signaling. So, if you haven't already, I would like for you to go back and look at some of the videos I have on spiritual bypass. Spiritual bypassing is basically taking a blanket and throwing it over an issue by using spiritual terms. People who are spiritually abusive also engage in spiritual bypassing. And once you watch that video, you'll understand a little bit more about how what I'm talking about now, virtue signaling, correlates with spiritual bypass. Okay, so when you think about things like spiritual bypass, um, somebody may be going through a very rough time, and somebody might say to them, "Well, everything works out for your good." And while that might be true, that might not be a very helpful thing to say to somebody in that particular situation. Spiritual bypass is using spirituality to bypass an issue. And so if you think about that, and then we get back to the topic of virtue signaling. The same mechanism is done in spiritually abusive environments, except virtues are being touted. So let me give you an example. Have you ever, think about a time maybe when you were in school and you told a teacher that somebody was bothering you. And the way the teacher, doesn't have to be a teacher, could have been any sort of adult or authority figure, the way they responded is they said, well, you know what? Nobody likes a tattletale, right? And so that is a form of virtue signaling because they're basically saying, hey, it's not a nice thing to tell on people. And that has an element of truth to it. Nobody particularly enjoys tattletales, but in that particular instance, if you are, talking about a real and hurtful behavior, you're being dismissed using this sort of virtue or, espousing virtue, right? And so, when virtue signaling is happening in a spiritually abusive situation, you'll hear a lot of niceties without any real action. And in fact, I believe that people that rely on virtue signaling as a form of spiritual abuse do this so that they don't have to take any action to address a situation. And so many of you have talked about your experiences with spiritual abuse on this channel, and I really appreciate you sharing them. And something that I have heard, not only through my work here on YouTube, but also my professional work as well as personal experiences, is that you'll see people say these things and they sound very much like spiritual cliches, but they are touting a particular virtue. So let me give you an example. Let's say that you are in an environment and you are, spiritual environment, and something bad is happening to you, right? Maybe you are witnessing somebody else being harmed by somebody else's spiritual behaviors, or maybe you yourself are being harmed. And so you bring it up to a leader or a spiritual authority, and they tell you, well, we can't judge people and we have to be kind to people and meet them where they're at. That is a form of virtue signaling. So this person is saying, we need to be kind to people and meet them where they are, but are they doing that to you in that moment, right? Are they even willing to listen to the fact that you are being harmed or someone else is being harmed by somebody in that environment? No. When you think about virtue signaling, I want you to think about approval trumping action. And what that means is that people that engage in a lot of virtue signaling are very much wanting to gain the approval of others. And in spiritual environments, I would take this one step further and they want to really appear like very righteous or very more, what's the word I'm looking for? Maybe enlightened, morally superior, whatever the case may be. And so you will hear things like this, especially from people that enable spiritual abusers and people that are either too, whether it's timid or just apathetic and they don't want to take any action in that case. And so many things that I've heard from people include virtue signaling around the topic of forgiveness. And so somebody might say, this thing happened to me. It may be something that is currently ongoing in a spiritual environment that is abusive, or it may be something that happened in the past that the individual is trying to get closure from. And they will hear the response, well, you know what? It's really important that we forgive people, and it's really important that we act loving toward people. So they may talk about things like love and forgiveness, and while those things are virtuous, they're not helping you in that particular case. It's being used as a way to dismiss and bypass what you're going through. And on top of that, I've often found that people who say these things typically act in ways that are actually against what they're saying. So if somebody is telling you about it's really important to love people, well, they are wanting you to not bother them or not burden them with what's going on. And they're not really showing very much love to you if they're not even willing to hear what you are going through and do anything about it, especially the fact that they are, an authority figure in that environment. So it's really important that when if you've gone through spiritual abuse, it can be very confusing. And when people do this virtue signaling, what it does is that it puts you in the position to sort of have to defend yourself and say, well, I'm a moral person, I love others, I forgive. One of the things that I hear a lot is being judgmental. And so people who a lot of times people who enable spiritual abuse will default to this concept of not judging people. But then at the same time, they will go about and judge you because you're judging somebody else. And so they might say how awful it is that you are only saying or thinking bad things about somebody. You are unkind, you're unloving, you're ungrateful, but they're also saying that it's important not to judge people, but they're doing the same thing. And so I want you, as you are just processing your spiritual abuse experience, to think about that. And the reason it's important to understand the role of virtue signaling is because it's a very effective tool in spiritual abuse. In spiritual environments, people want to appear moral. They want to appear enlightened. They want to look like people who adhere to certain virtues. And I wouldn't even say you want to look like that. I mean, that's something you aspire to. Spirituality oftentimes is associated with things that are good, enlightened, things like that. And so when people really latch on to this issue of virtue, right? Either through virtue signaling or spiritual bypassing or whatever they are doing, what that causes you to do is to, and I'm not shaming you or judging you for this, it's a natural response. You're going to want to defend yourself so that you look like you're not a bad person. And think about it, that makes sense. Nobody wants to look like they're a bad person. The problem with this is that when people engage in a lot of virtue signaling, they don't understand nuance or they're choosing to ignore it in that particular case. And so if we go back to the idea of judging someone, let's say that you bring up a behavior that you feel is concerning, that's problematic, or that's abusive. Instead of that authority figure responding to that behavior and addressing the root of the issue, they are in that they're basically saying it is good to do X, Y, and Z, right? And so by you responding to that or challenging that, it's implying that you're saying that's not a good thing. So how do you deal with that? Well, there are plenty of ways you can deal with that, and I probably don't have enough time to go into it in this video, but the most important thing is that when you recognize that virtue signaling is occurring, I don't want you to become defensive, because all that's going to do is going to derail you, and it's going to take away the focus on that particular topic that you are trying to bring light to. If we bring up the thing about loving people, you can love people and still bring up things that you don't like that they do. Pointing out the truth about a situation is not judging somebody. And in a lot of these spiritual environments, the idea of not judging people is used as a way to shield abusive people from taking accountability for their actions. And so the next time you are in a situation like that, and you are battling somebody who is a bona fide virtue signaler, don't bring up the virtue at all. And I don't want you to get defensive. I just want you to remember to repeat the issue that you're bringing up and how you're being harmed. Now, I can't guarantee that this is always going to work. In fact, if you're in a spiritually abusive environment, I don't think it's going to go very far. But the important thing is that you don't get sucked into this game of defending yourself and trying to make yourself seem like you're not a bad person. And so when you hear words being thrown around about love and acceptance and not judging and forgiving people, don't react to that. Don't try to show that you are a loving person or that you are a forgiving person or a judgmental person or whatever. Part of the territory that comes along with spiritual abuse is unfortunately being misunderstood and being mislabeled. And so when people, I want you to think about this, the people that are virtue signaling and telling you how it's important to be kind to people and loving and all this other stuff, ask yourself if they're showing you what they are talking about. Going back to what I said earlier, virtue signaling really is putting the emphasis on people's approval and your own appearance over genuine action. And that's one of the rules that I talk about frequently in a spiritually abusive environment. Spiritually abusive people and spiritually abusive environments always favor appearance over authenticity. And so in this case, what you're battling is somebody that wants to sound good and look good without paying the price of doing anything to actually embody those virtues, right? So somebody who's talking to you about love and not judging would be showing you love and not judging you for doing something that they don't particularly like. When you think about authorities in spiritually abusive environments, they don't particularly like to hear that bad things are going on. I wouldn't even say they're bad things. I would just say things that maybe make them feel uncomfortable or challenge the image that they have of a perfect environment. And so the next time you are in that situation, what did I say to do? The first thing is don't react, don't be defensive, right? Your character is not up for debate in this situation. You're bringing up something that somebody else did or a concern that you have. And so you have to sort of get yourself a bit more comfortable. I know it's a lot easier said than done than having your character attacked. And then I also want you to think and ask yourself this question, this virtue that this person is going on and on about, are they showing that to you in that particular situation? Something that I've talked about in some of my other videos is that in spiritually abusive environments, the needs of the leaders are much more important than the needs of everybody else. And so the need of that leader in that moment in time is much more important than the issue that you are bringing up, whether it's that leader's need to feel comfortable and not have to take any action. Maybe it's something that maybe they feel that by, confronting someone that they're not going to look like a nice person, right? And so think about that in that situation and assure yourself that your virtues are not up for debate. Now, I'm not saying that you should take that sentiment and not engage in any sort of self exploration or even self criticism. Criticizing yourself and being aware of your own actions is an important part of your spiritual and psychological growth. But what I am saying is that you don't want to neglect the root of the issue at that point in time. Okay, so I really hope that that information helps you. Like again, I said, they have videos on spiritual bypassing, and I'd really like for you to look at that, those videos so that you understand a little bit more about what I'm talking about when virtue signaling comes up. So I'd like to hear from you in the comments section. What sorts of experiences have you had with virtue signaling? How do you feel like it comes up or presents itself in spiritually abusive environments? And what advice would you have for others who have been through that or going through that? I'd love to hear from you about that. I hope you have a wonderful day that is filled with peace. And also, before I forget, if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel. That will help you with getting updates, like as for instance, when I go live or post a new video. And then also sharing and commenting will help get this video out to people who have similar views to you. So if you haven't done that already, please do so. You can also go to my website, skillsetcounseling.com, and click on the button for a free consultation if you'd like one. All right. I hope you have a wonderful day that's filled with peace. Bye-bye.